Alrighty. I really wasn't kidding when I said I've been rewriting my talk with each successive previous speaker. Oh yeah, I want to say that. Oh, I can expand on that a little bit, tell a little bit more about that. But then as I sat in the back of the room and found myself fascinated by hearing Peter once again, and also feeling the weight of all this sitting and listening and this brain overload, I thought the last thing they need is more stuff being crammed in. So my wish is to make it a good portion of my time a little more interactive. And so even though it's against my nature to stop talking, I'll do my best here. Let me see if I can quiet down the crowd out there. Yeah.
Love to be brave.
Yeah. Okay. Folks, we're starting. Yeah. Can't even get the conference organizer in here. Come on. Jeez. As much as we want to let you play and talk on yourself by yourselves, you obviously need some facilitation. So what I've decided is I'm going to spend a little time giving a personal story because it, in my mind at least, we'll find out what you think, weaves together a lot of the themes of today. And I'll talk about some of the influences in my life and how they impacted on not only the choices that I made, but the implications for me as an example of maybe the best of times and the worst of times with regard to conventional schooling. Let me follow Russ Akoff's recommendation that we begin with the end in mind. I have been guided for 20 years by one line from the book Growing Young by Ashley Montague, which is that the trick in life is to die young, as late as possible. Another way of saying that is from an education standpoint, one piece of, and a major piece of the focus for me has been to help people retain the attributes of toddlers. Toddlers are, as John Holt so adequately described them, more than adequately, a brilliant young scientist. They follow the scientific method. They develop hypotheses, they experiment, they explore, they create and adjust. They don't worry about failure. They don't even have the negative concept of failure. As a photography instructor of mine once said about photography, there are no mistakes, only different effects. So when you're a toddler and you're fiddling with things and something happens, you don't think, oh, I messed up. You think, I wonder why that happened. What'll happen if I do this? Pat referred to Sugata Mitra's TED Talk. I really encourage those of you who haven't seen it to Google that. It is almost unbelievable what these young people in the slums of New Delhi were able to, thinking about Montessori, were able to figure out on their own. And it's pretty clear they are not gifted young folks. So, how to die young as late as possible. So here's a bit about my story, and I'll keep it brief, relatively. I graduated from the college in 1967, absolutely clueless. And I say that to people, and they kind of don't really totally believe it. Please believe it. The Vietnam War was raging, and I had only one idea in my mind, which is how not get drafted. I had no intention or willingness whatsoever to go shoot people that I had nothing against. And my only option, because of the district that I was from, was the Peace Corps. So I signed up for an elementary education project in the Peace Corps. And I picked elementary education because the alternative was community development, and I was told that that basically meant teaching African villagers how to use toilets. And I was always fond of young people, and so that sounded somewhat more interesting. The purpose of the elementary education project that I was enrolled in was to teach new math to old math Filipino teachers in Tagalog, which of course I spoke fluently. And in the process of the Peace Corps training, I came to see that of my 75 fellow volunteers, almost none of them could create lesson plans for our practice teaching in 3rd and 4th grade elementary school math. And they were all college graduates like I was. And I kind of scratched my head and said, what's wrong with this picture? Not that I was a math genius, but I could do 3rd or 4th grade math. And of course, the beauty of the intention behind new math was that you have to understand the concepts. You can't just memorize and regurgitate, which, as we know, is largely what so much schooling is all about. So that was my first sense that something was wrong with this picture for other people, not just me. And then about 8 weeks into the training program, my girlfriend at the time sent me a copy of John Holt's How Children Fail. And I literally had an epiphany. And when I read that school is where children learn to feel stupid, and I learned, and I read his distinction between producers and thinkers, and how producers are those young people who learn how to play the system, and they get good grades, and the teachers love them because they memorize the formulas, and they turn the crank, and they get the right answers. For the first time in my life at age 23, I said to myself, self, for that was my name at the time, it's not you, it's the system. For the first time in my life, I looked at myself from the outside instead of from the inside, and I got a hint that all of those imposter feelings that I had were totally appropriate and not my fault. And shortly thereafter, I read in the letters to the editor of the Harvard magazine from one of the alumni that he had had since graduation a recurring dream that it was the morning of an exam. He had overslept, and he wasn't sure where the exam was being proffered. And but he did realize that he had never been to class and hadn't done any of the reading, and he was about to be unveiled as a fraud. And in his letter, he queried to the other alumni, has anybody else had a dream like this? The letter produced the largest outpouring of letters to the editor in the history of the magazine, including one from George Wald, who is a Nobel Prize-winning biologist, who said he had that dream for 25 years after he got his PhD. So then I really knew I was a member of a not very select club. And I have since found out that it's a near universal club for all of those teacher pleasers like me who were good boys and girls and memorized and regurgitated and got called smart but felt stupid. So upon reading this book, How Children Fail, I now had a purpose in life. Whereas, as I say before, I was literally the proverbial cork on the ocean. As fortune would have it, 2 weeks later, I was medically disqualified for a bad back, which I had told the Peace Corps about, but it took a while for the paperwork to catch up. And so I was, as they say, medically deselected and was back on the streets of Cambridge with this dream, but no plan, no strategy, and no qualifications. I had a BA in American history, which qualified me for the draft and the Peace Corps. And so I came to the Harvard Graduate School of Education placement office, and I said, I think I want to teach, but I don't want to teach that way. I want to learn more about another way for young people to learn, et cetera, which Holt really only hinted at in his first book. What do you suggest I do? Well, they said, did I say this was going to be short? No. They said, well, you're not certified, so you can either get a job at some desperate private school that doesn't require that, but since it was after Labor Day, their rosters were all full, or you can get a job substitute teaching in the Boston public schools. Doesn't that tell you something? So I went to my interview and was filled out the application, was in my tweediest clothes, but I didn't have a tie on, I have to confess. And the lady behind the desk looked at me, and she looked at my application, and she looked at me and looked at my application, and she said, you do understand that you'll have to wear a tie, right? And I said, oh yes, I understand that. And then she looked back and she looked more closely at my application, and she said, I think there's a mistake here. And I said, well, why is that? And she said, well, you've applied for grades K through 3. And I said, yeah, I particularly like working with young people because I think that, you know, they're most alive. She said, well, the law in Boston is you have to be a female to teach in those grades. And I said, what you just said, which is, you're kidding. And she said, I most certainly am not. At which point I reached across the desk and I took my application out of her hand so she wouldn't have any written record of who I was. That was the end of my public school teaching career. So I'm a little ahead of you, Kevin. And I went back to the placement office, told them the story, and they said, yeah, what's new? And they said they really couldn't come up with anything else except that the gentleman really took pity on me, I guess. And he leaned back in his chair and he called down the hall and he said, hey, I don't remember the name truthfully, Jimmy, what's the name of that firm in the square that's doing the creative writing textbooks? And the guy called back, Synectics. So he said, maybe you can't get a job in the classroom, but here's the foot in the door of somebody who's doing something reasonably innovative in the field of education. Well, I got the address. Synectics was on the way home, so right on Church Street between the two parts of the coop. So I stopped in. Now I will shorten this story. But basically, Synectics really changed my life. It turns out, yes, they were doing that one project, and I worked on that for 8 or 9 months. But for the subsequent 6 years, I worked in the other part of the company, which was a consulting group that taught creative group problem solving. They basically were helping adult middle managers and senior managers from corporate Fortune 500 companies how to think like toddlers, how to collaborate, how to think imaginatively, and specifically how to think metaphorically, how to connect things in their minds that aren't normally connected, because that's what creativity and particularly innovation and invention is all about. I'm sure you've all had the experience where you looked at something and said, why didn't I think of that? You know, two obvious things that are not obvious when they're apart, but when somebody else puts them together, you think, what a clever idea. How did that happen? So I spent 4 years mastering, well, that was self-congratulatory, learning how to get better at facilitating meetings of business people so that they could think and act more like knowledgeable toddlers. The reason that toddlers don't invent anything that's new and useful to the world is they don't know enough yet. They don't have the data. The problem, of course, with the systems that you've been hearing about all morning are that in the process of acquiring a lot of that data, we crush the connection-making ability. And we tend to really stifle the particularly innovative aspects of that. Thinking about things and putting things together that aren't normally related for the purpose of generating a new way of looking at them and some new insight. And that was the work of synectics. And I was loving doing that, even though I wasn't too excited about some of the problems we were being asked to work on for corporate America. And then along comes a teacher in a what I call liberated Montessori school in Connecticut to take the course to learn how to apply some of this in staff development work and to see what the implications might be for her classroom back home. And she said, you know, what you're doing here is remedial. You're helping adults retrieve the kind of thinking patterns that are natural to young people, then they get schooled out of them. And I said to myself, you're right. Will you marry me? It took her almost 3 years to come around, but we decided to couple and to start a nonprofit organization for the purpose of bringing the learnings from the synectics process into the world of education, as we call it, or meeting schools. And in 1978, we opened a preschool kindergarten in the western suburbs of Philadelphia, in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, for 2.5 to 5-year-olds, specifically for the purpose of, first of all, allowing to flourish and not punishing the metaphorical thinking and the natural collaboration that happens with young people. But in addition to that, trying to find ways of sharing some of this data about the world that is more or less under the umbrella of conventional school curricula, but doing it in a way that, again, didn't conflict with the healthy development of self-esteem. So, for example, we had a rule that adults in the room were not allowed to ask young people any question to which the adults already had the answer, because that's a test. And one of the things that was so obvious and well documented in How Children Fail was that what young people learned most and best in school are the games and strategies to either come up with the right answer or to make the teacher think that they had come up with the right answer and perhaps get the teacher to come up with the right answer. And John has some hilarious examples of how teachers, outside their own awareness, keep giving clues to young people to help them come up with the right answer. And of course, when they do, then what a great teacher I am, you got it. So we worked on that for several years. And then our firstborn was approaching the age of 6, which meant she was too big for the furniture in our preschool kindergarten program. And people started asking us, well, where's Amanda going to go to school? And we didn't know. But we naively thought that we could find a private school that would allow part-time participation. We didn't believe in full-time incarceration at that point. And Peter, in his book, he talks about the three different types of parenting: the trustful and the directive, protective, and boy, I'm embarrassed to say we fall heavily into the directive, protective, which is not as good as trustful, but it's better than the alternative. We didn't want to just send our 5-year-old off into the world, maybe into a hunter-gatherer society, but we didn't have any of those in our neighborhood. Well, the private schools, of course, looked at us like we had 3 heads. And we said, well, if we let Amanda come part-time, then everybody will want to come part-time. To which I said, well, doesn't that tell you something? They didn't want to hear that. So that was the end of Amanda's private school teaching or participation. We also, at that time, had a parent who had a 5-year-old son in our program, thriving, happy as could be, and an 8-year-old older sister who was in a local parochial school who was really being abused. She was one of these chubby, sloppy, bookish type girls that had terrible handwriting, et cetera, but just as sweet and bright as could be, and was constantly being berated by the staff and bullied by the other young people. And the mother would come in to pick up her 5-year-old son every day, half in tears, begging us to become an elementary school so that she could send her 8-year-old. And we said, no, we don't believe in full-time program, et cetera. And so it went on like that for several months until one day she came in holding a magazine on newsprint with a big smile on her face for the first time, saying, "Eureka, Eureka, I found it." What she was holding was an early copy of Growing Without Schooling, John Holt's magazine, about homeschooling, surprisingly enough. And she said, "We're going to homeschool." And we said, "What's that?" And as we heard a little bit more about it, there was our answer. So from that point on, Open Connections started a transformation from a preschool kindergarten 4 mornings a week to a resource center for self-directed learners. And that's what Open Connections is today. We have about 160 or so young people. They come part-time, most 2 and a few 3 days a week. It's not a democratic school in that they come and do whatever they want, wherever they want. It's not a North Star or a Princeton Learning Cooperative or some of the other places around. There are specific identified programs with particular purposes, subject matters, whatever, with groups ranging from 12 to 15 or so in number, somewhat multi-age groups, usually a 3-year age spread for most of the programs. And there might be a naturalist program, group tutorials where they'll cover numerous topics. There is heavy influence in terms of what the activities are and what the topics are that are pursued by the young people. It's not a classroom, it's not a school situation where there's a set curriculum. Unless it is set ahead of time and you sign up for movie making because you're interested in movie making. You don't go into the movie making group and say, "Hey, let's have a wood shop." There is a wood shop and that's available for their use. So in a way, it's a hybrid. It's kind of a bridge between unschooling, total self-direction on the one hand, and a progressive school, if you will, on the other hand. I'm a believer that there is a natural law of variation. And in the same way that we chastise public schools as trying to be a one-size-fits-all that makes all young people sit down, shut up, and learn the way, I think it would be a mistake to try and do the same thing or have the same attitude as we create alternatives. I don't think there's a perfect alternative in and of itself, let alone a perfect model that everybody should emulate. Some folks are going to want a Sudbury Valley. Some folks are going to want a North Star. Some are going to want an Open Connections. And some are going to want public school. And some are going to want military academy. And if we, Matt Judson, who was the head of the Fairweather Street School for a couple of years, some of you may be familiar with that, said to me one time, the freedom to choose involves the freedom to choose to do nothing. That got him fired from the Fairweather Street School because he let young people, I mean, you can't do nothing. Even if you're in a coma, you're doing something. But to not, to be totally self-directed. And if you want to sit and look out the window all day, if you're not free to do that, you know, there's a limit to how free you are. At Open Connections, you're free to choose whatever program you want, and you're free to participate in a program at a very low level of participation if you want. You're not free to interfere with the rights of others by being disruptive in any consistent and significant way. And if you do, then the little community that you're in works it out. Let me say a couple other things about Open Connections, and I'll show you a couple of pictures so you have visions of that. And then I want to say a little bit about paradigms, and then I'm going to stop and give you a chance to talk. Okay, so what did I just say? I'm going to show you some pictures. All righty. Pat, I may have to ask you to tell me how to do this. All right, so if I just click on this, will that do it? No, that didn't do it. Left screen, right screen. Oh, here.
That button.
Wait, this?
Nope, this one.
Oh, this
Right.
one down here?
Yep.
I got a right-handed mouse here. Come on. Why isn't the thing coming down?
Disappearing there.
Yeah.
Is this another one?
Here, why don't we,
I know, the mouse seems to be stuck in the...
should we just hit?
Oh, wait, can we just touch it? I think that's what you want.
I think.
There we go.
Yeah, I would try right screen.
This is what we call lifelong learning. Okay, so there's a big overview of our current campus. It's 28 acres. We're so fortunate. About 5 years ago, we built the building on the left, which is a restored 1840s timber frame barn. And that was a process that many members of the community were involved in helping make happen. So, yes, there's some conventional stuff that you might see in other programs. This is Lego Mindstorms, and these young ladies are in a program where they're learning to program these robotic things. Some physics, mechanical advantage, simple machines. This is inside the barn. We are strong believers in what we call real work, young people doing things that really matter. and giving them the tools, literally and figuratively, to create their dreams. This boy and girl decided they wanted to go out on the pond and wanted to build a canoe. You may not have instantly recognized that as a canoe, but it is, as we say at Synectics, an approximate canoe. And there's tools available for young folks starting at age 4. Some of you may be familiar with the model that was called the British Infant Schools. I had the good fortune of visiting them in the late 60s and saw these young people using real tools and experimenting, and you should see some of the parents when they come to visit for the first time and they see these tools that are way up on the top shelf with the poison arrows at home, and they want to know, the 4-year-old's really allowed to use these power drills and these saws. So, no, but, oh, sorry. Did I do the, okay. In case you didn't see that the first time. All right, I have only 10 slides, so don't worry, I'm not going to spend. This adorable young person's one of my grandsons. I just had to put that in there. Oh, he's going to fall. Lady over here was talking about, you know, the negative messages that we gotten. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Gene Liedloff's book, The Continuum Concept. That was my introduction to the notion that we don't have to put in young people's minds the image of their incompetence. We don't have to teach them to be afraid and to try, either try to do stupid, dangerous things that are beyond them, or to be afraid of trying new things that they could learn how to do. If we, as Peter Gray was saying, largely stay out of the way, they have a pretty sensible internal mechanism that says, I'm not going out on that log, because they know they're not ready yet. And so they'll practice on something else. And those that are, do. Another real work project. Another one of my adorable grandchildren on the left there in purple. They are filling these planter boxes in a memorial garden that we're designing. Here's another water transport device being carried by these young folks. I hope you're getting a sense of fun and play. They're all free to quit. Now, see, here's an example. No young person came in and said, you know, I'd like to learn how to roll up newspaper and see if we can make a stable structure out of rolled up newspaper. This is an idea that came from an adult. They were free to try it or not, as they wished. One of the open questions for me, and I don't think it'll ever get closed, is, Peter and I were talking about this on the way in this morning. So what is the role of adults? Lord knows we've heard enough today about what it isn't. And we're really good at that. We've also heard a bit about one part of our role, which is to get the heck out of the way and to be a loving, nurturing model, but otherwise give them all kinds of space and freedom and this and that. But of course, we don't live in a hunter-gatherer society. We don't live in a world that is, what can I say? Well, it really isn't as safe, it isn't anywhere near as dangerous as we present it. but it also isn't ideally safe. And we adults do know some things that are useful to young people that we may want to consciously share with them. How do we do that? When do we do that? Who leads that process? I think those are still open-ended questions. I don't have the answers to all of those. So John Holt used to say, he always cringed at the use of the term experimental school, because he said all schools are experimental. And if they're not, they certainly should be, because it means that you're not still learning and figuring things out and continuously improving. So we are absolutely experimenting right alongside the young folks. And they let us know when we overstep the bounds. So the idea of using nature to create art, it does emerge spontaneously from young folks, from some young folks, but not from others. So in the naturalist program, this was offered to young people as saying, hey, you know, you can take some of the things that grow around here and create some really neat art. And there are about 30 slides of this, but I only picked the one here. And that may be the end. Yeah, okay, that's my 10 slides. Okay, so now I want to say a little bit about paradigms, and then I'll stop and open it up to you folks. I think a big part of what we're talking about today here does have to do with the challenge of shifting paradigms, what that means and how to go about doing that. And unfortunately, paradigms is one of those terms that got into the common culture and gets used at a very superficial level. I'd like to very specifically define it using the words of Thomas Kuhn, who in the Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and then a business consultant named Joel Barker picked up on it even more. And it was from him that I learned the definition of paradigms as a mental model of the way things work. Or as James Hernon said, the way they're supposed to be. We have paradigms for everything. Like you keep your food in refrigerators and in cabinets. There's a paradigm for how we go about getting from one place to another. There's a car paradigm. And if somebody said, you want to buy a new car, it's only $10, and you said, sure, and you said, well, here, well, you'd know that didn't work because this doesn't fit your paradigm of what's a car. So we have an education paradigm, which is school. And what those of us that are speaking today are concerned about is changing that paradigm. But one of the things that paradigms do is that they filter out data that doesn't fit the paradigm. So you literally can't see, or sometimes can't believe, what you're seeing or what you're hearing. You know, the idea of these 2-year-olds playing with machetes does not fit our toddler paradigm. And in the continuum concept, Jean Liedloff opened up the world. She showed us a whole different paradigm of relationships between adults and young people that involved levels of trust and levels of freedom that are literally inconceivable for most people today. And the idea that you could get through life happily and productively without a college degree doesn't fit the paradigm that is largely promoted today. So a lot of what we're talking about today is, first of all, identifying what are the paradigms that drive our decision making, and let's at least make those conscious so that we can then start to recalculate or reconsider what are some of those paradigms that might not be fulfilling our expectations or blatantly are not fulfilling it. And what can we do about it? And then along with that, we've tried to provide some examples. I don't want to call them models, because that sort of suggests you should copy it. But some examples of other paradigms or other ways of behaving, other strategies that are based on a different paradigm, a paradigm of trust and nurturance and the fact that we really are born to learn and to create and to connect with other people in very positive ways. And to my way of thinking, that's what today's been about. That's what we've tried to open up for you today, or expand. I have a sense from so many of the questions and the backgrounds I've heard that a lot of you are already well down that road. But it's also, I think, important to bang those ideas and those offerings up against the current paradigm and ask questions like, yeah, but what about, in the same way that when my wife and I decide to have our own offspring, the paradigm was still overwhelmingly hospital births. And my wife read a article in the local newspaper about a new hospital that was staffed by midwives, and among other things in their sales pitch, they referenced a book called Birth Without Violence by Frederick Leboyer, totally shifting the medical paradigm. And for those of you who have experienced the joy of home birth, it's a good thing women have them, I'll tell you. The race would have died out long ago. That's a paradigm that's kind of shifted now. Or at least to the extent that people don't look at you with three heads. The same with if you're using a midwife, if you're having a home birth or using a birth center. And in fact, hospitals are hiring midwives. There's a real example of a slowly shifting paradigm. Whole Foods. Used to be if you bought organic and ate only organic, you were from California and really weird. And now, somebody's figured out how to make a lot of money. I don't know if you understand that. I think it's called whole paycheck where I live from. So there's hope out there for those of us that want to shift the paradigm of compulsory schooling. And come on down. We'd love to have your help. I'm going to stop myself. Let's do some questions and answers, and then thank you. Also, I understand there's a group that wants to network around
Learning centers.
Okay, so if that group wants to come over to this corner or something after we break, that's great. Kevin, you're circulating a list that I should reference?
Or if everyone has a chance to opportunity to decide. I was just looking for people. It was like I said before about trying to not make this a TED Talks kind of thing, really get people engaged in doing things to develop and build community. I guess the list is over there. Or it's just for people to write in something so that they can kind of honor their own commitments to try to build and develop the community that we're trying to contribute to, that exists and needs to be nourished and continue to grow.
Great. And one other comment I want to make, and then we'll get to the questions. On the table with the books, there is a framed flyer about a conference Memorial Day weekend on Long Island, sponsored by a group called AERO, Alternative Education Resource Organization. A wide range of keynote speakers and workshops. Peter and I are going to talk about a website that our group is preparing to launch called alternativestoschool.com. Peter and I also have our own separate workshops. Jerry Mintz, who's the director of Aero, has authorized me to offer you a discount on their registration fee, which is noted on the flyer. So if you just mention either my name or this conference, you'll get their discount. And I don't even request a kickback, you know, because just seeing you here is enough. There was a question over here. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm part of a very small group of parents in Middletown, Connecticut that started hybrid as well. We're very kind of ground up. I was wondering, one, you know, what do you consider? What is your group? Are you a school? Are you a not-for-profit?
Well, that's very interesting that you asked that. And the reason it's so interesting is because we were licensed originally as a preschool kindergarten program. And then as we transitioned into more of a resource center, we didn't meet the requirements for licensing for a kindergarten, so we dropped our kindergarten license, but we continued with the preschool licensing. And then, this is over a period now of 32 years. And the license is renewable every year. This past year, it's not nice, Peter. I was going to say the geniuses at the Pennsylvania Department of Education challenged our preschool license on whether we were providing an adequate, because you know they've defined very specifically what you have to do. And we said to ourselves, why are we doing this? And we decided to drop the licensing because we don't need it. So we're nothing. We're just us. We have no legal, we're a corporation. We're a nonprofit corporation, 501c3, thank you very much. And, but as far as the Department of Education is concerned, no. Right. We're out of the compulsory miseducation business. Yes, I'll be right over. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. How do you go about funding a program like this? Because I've noticed that any like alternatives to traditional school are not attainable to so many parents because they cost so much money.
Find a sugar daddy. The first sugar daddy that Open Connections had was my wife and myself. We wanted it so badly. We bought a property that was big enough for our home in one building and a 1,000 square foot building next to it where we had our center. And I worked as a independent consultant part-time. And we charged tuition, but it certainly wasn't, the size of the program wasn't enough to sustain us. We muddled along on savings and our own contributions and my supporting our family through the consulting for many, many years. And then actually fairly early in our career, we decided to write our book as a fundraising effort. And we handed it out, a copy out to all of our families. And we said, if you know anybody of means who might be willing to support this kind of program, please give it to us. There were about 25 families at that point. One of them came up to me, one of the moms came up to me and said, we don't have any money, we're public school teachers, blah, blah, blah. But I sing in the Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church Choir with Kara Haas. I was relatively new to the area. I didn't know who that was. Roman Haas is like Dow Chemical. They are a huge chemical and plastics company that had set up the William Penn Foundation, all kinds of major foundation work in Philadelphia. So could I have a copy to give to Kara Haas? Sure. Kara took one look at this. She was, and said, oh, early childhood education, not interested, but my daughter-in-law is. So she sent it off to Connecticut to her daughter-in-law, who read the book, and she said, oh my God, she had the same response I did when I read How Children Fail. She called us up and she said, my husband and I are going to relocate to the Philadelphia area. I want to come teach at your school, and yes, we used the S word in those days. You don't have to pay me, but I want to learn from you folks, et cetera, et cetera. That, in the next 10 years, translated into $1 million initial donation that helped us put a down payment down when we found this new property. And another parent who is the CEO and primary owner of a mid-sized software company came to us and said, I've got some money, I've got some friends with money. My wife will not homeschool unless Open Connections is guaranteed to exist, you know, until she graduated. Took one look at me and figured, you know, I'm about to cash it in. And little did he know I was just getting started. And they have helped us raise comparable amounts of money. Those folks are out there. There are a lot of very wealthy people who want to do good things with their money. There is a scarcity mentality that thrives in the alternative schools business. And I think they really limit themselves by thinking everything has to be done on the cheap. And no question about it, we were fortunate, but fortune favors the prepared mind. So talk to everybody you know and tell them what it is you want to do and what specifically they can do to help make it happen. And if you tell enough people, eventually the right ones will show up. I absolutely believe that. So there you go. Yeah, sorry to make you wait so long.
And that's totally fine. As a psychotherapist, I gotta say that I can't look at kids, at my grandchildren or clients in situations that I grew up to see as dangerous, even though I have made a paradigm shift in my life. Growing up in the 50s was a different story. So what I do is I take it on me, because they're going to pick up on my anxiety and my fearfulness. So I'll really dramatically say, oy, 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 is Bobby worried? Or something like that. And that totally takes the responsibility of my reaction, both internal and external, on me. If I try to hide it, they're going to feel it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to comment
well,
on
plus,
psychological.
Yeah, good for you. And plus, I think the fact that, I mean, the unspoken words that follow what Bobby just said is, and by the way, I'm not going to stop you, says to me that they're going to hear, well, it can't be that bad because Bobby loves me and she wouldn't let me do anything that was really going to be all that bad. So it really is her versus the it. So I can keep going. Yeah. Yes.
Hi. I just want to say, I'm with Advocates for Home Education in Massachusetts, and I just wanted to, I know there's a lot of people here who are interested in starting learning centers and those kinds of things, which I think is great. I'm all for more opportunities and getting kids out of school. But one of the things I think about sometimes, or worry about, is like, sorry if I'm not that articulate, I just thought I should say like, sort of like the definition of homeschooling in Massachusetts, it's, the parents in charge, blah, blah, and then there's schools that are regulated and licensed like we were talking about. And then there's these learning centers that are cropping up and where does the line get drawn in the minds of, say, the people who make the rules of what constitutes a school and what constitutes, homeschooling, like, I don't know the answer, but I'd like people to just have that in their minds when they're creating things, because I'm always very protective of our ability to not go to school. I don't want,
Yeah.
Homeschooling to become the target of, like say maybe you have a center and the authorities think it should be a school, and you were just, do you know what I'm trying to articulate?
Yeah, well, I can tell you what it's sparking for me, a couple of things. First is, I think we take it upon ourselves to try and explain and gain understanding, if not support, of what we're wanting to do from people who are not going to get there. And my own personal view is that's not my job. If they're uncomfortable with with my choices, they own that discomfort, and all I need to do is continue to do whatever I need to do to keep doing what I'm doing, but not make them
I'm not talking
comfortable.
about making people comfortable. I'm
Well-
talking about, say, when the local authorities say,
Yeah.
wait a minute, what is this place with these kids
Yeah.
running around? You didn't register with us. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Right.
That's what I'm worried about.
Right, right. And this is really probably a longer conversation, and I don't know the specifics of your circumstance, so I can only speak in some generalities. But mostly, my sense is do what you want to do and let them tell you when they have a problem, and then figure out how to problem solve after the fact. It's like ask for forgiveness rather than permission
Well, the
kind of
reason
thing.
I would be concerned about
But-
this is that if it becomes the view that the problem is that the homeschoolers aren't regulated enough and they're getting away with something, that's what I get concerned about. Like,
Yeah.
that will impact the ability of people who just don't want to have their kids in any kind of center or school, just want to, unschool, homeschool, however.
Right.
That's
Well,
what I was concerned
right. And that's a little bit of what I meant by don't buy trouble. If that day comes, you'll be able to deal with it. I was part of the group that rewrote the current Pennsylvania law with regard to homeschooling. And it's considered one of the most restrictive sets of homeschooling laws in the country. What most people don't realize is that the Department of Education, the legislature was under federal court order. They found that the previous law was unconstitutionally vague, and they were given 2 years to either pass new legislation, or if they failed by midnight on November, whatever, the last night of the session, of that legislative session, then they would lose the right to write a law, and it would go to the Department of Education to write regulations. And the Pennsylvania Department of Education was on record as saying, if you want to homeschool in Pennsylvania, you have to be a certified teacher. So we were up against that wall. We got our law passed 20 minutes before the end of the session. And it has.
I'm talking about Massachusetts.
Yeah, I know. I'm just, let me, I want to go from this specific to a generic. So when people come to me now and say, "Oh, I've got to keep this log, of everything is done every day, all the subjects we teach, blah, blah, blah." Those are all in the laws. My wife and I had 4 young people. They homeschooled all the way through. We never kept a log. We developed a wonderful relationship with our local superintendent. We complied with 20% of what's in the law. So most of what I want to say is those bureaucracies are so busy with so much, they don't have time to waste with you. So don't worry, that's what I mean by don't worry about trying to convert them or come up with too many big solutions. You can just wear them down through avoidance, through trickery, all those things you learn in school. Okay? But we can talk more about it, because I'm not specifically familiar with it. But don't think globally. Don't think huge solutions.
Well, I'm not thinking huge
Think about
solutions.
specific
I'm
ones.
thinking about staying out of trouble. Because
Yeah.
in Massachusetts, we don't have a statute,
Yeah.
and I don't want one.
But just think about staying out of trouble one family at a time as opposed to universal policies and procedures. That's what I'm suggesting. Okay, I'm over my time limit. So again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Kevin, very much for organizing this. And we will, Peter and Kevin and Pat and I will hang around for as long until they throw us out. Enjoy, safe travels.